the number one thing I'm told by young people in our community about God is they feel like at some point in their life, they gave up on God because they felt like He gave up on them. They feel abandoned by God through a situation. Where was God during that moment of abuse? Where was God during that season of trial? Where was God when I felt like He could have stepped in and He didn't? Where was God then? I want to tell you where He was. He was weeping with those that were weeping. Listen, you have a choice, but God has a choice. I think it's really important when she's troubled, God brings His grace alongside her. The word troubled, diatarasso, it's talking about the perplexing, just the confusion, the bewilderment, to be so thrown off by a situation or an event. I was 16 or 17 years old, and I'll never forget, and if you are old enough to remember 9/11, when we saw those towers, I mean, there was just that moment of just troubled, not knowing how many. I mean, 3 attacks, and then it was like, where's the country going, and how many of these attacks are going to come, and where's the next one, and you're just kind of waiting for the shoe to drop, and there's just kind of that fear, that perplexing, and for me specifically, I was thinking, man, I think we're going to war. I'm probably going to get drafted. You know, you're thinking all of those things like, hey, here's what's next. Kind of confused, kind of troubled. And in the middle of fear, and middle of worry, in the middle of concern, I think it's important for us to anchor our souls to God's plan and God's word. You see, Jerry Bridges said this: God's plan and His ways of working out His plan are frequently beyond our ability to fathom and understand. We must learn to trust even when we don't understand. And so she cast in her mind. We've talked about this word dialogizomai before, but it's a word for having a conversation with yourself. And we all do that, okay? It's between you and the Lord if you actually talk out loud to yourself, okay? But we all have those moments where we're just having this conversation, we're discussing this, we're pondering it, we're trying to figure out, we don't understand. And I've had a lot of people tell me, like, if I understood more about Jesus, I would follow Him. If I could wrap my head around the Trinity, or if I could wrap my head around these truths, then I would have faith. Can I remind you that faith does not mean understanding everything. No one understands everything. Faith means you trust God is still good even when you are confused and concerned. And so she asked this question in her mind: what manner of salutation is this? The word "what manner" is like, where's this coming from? Look, like, why me? Like, why is He telling me this? Why is He greeting me in this way? The word salutation means like a formal address. Like, this is something you would address a king or a queen this way. You would address a prince this way. And she's looking at her in all of her kind of her lonely, lowly state and saying, why me? In the midst of difficulty, in the midst of confusion, God guides us through His grace, but He always guides us, letter B, to truth. God's grace guides us to the truth. And before He says, hey, this is God's truth that He wants you to anchor your heart to in this moment, He says, don't fear, because fear is going to keep you from being able to process the truth. We've studied this word. It's phobeo. It means to be worried and filled with anxiety. God always gives His truth and direction, even in the midst of fear, even in the midst of anxiety, even in the midst of doubt. But can I encourage you not to abandon what is good and the next good step just because you feel like God hasn't been good. And so what happens is we use this idea that, well, God has hurt me, or God has abandoned me, or God did this thing that I wished wouldn't have happened. And so because God hasn't been good, well, I guess I'll just kind of abandon these principles, this way, this plan that He's given to me. We use it as a scapegoat. And so Randy Alcorn wrote in his book, Grace and Truth, The Paradox, he said, trust in God's grace and it will empower you to say no to sin and to say yes to truth.